In the vast, wind-swept grasslands of Central Asia, far from the marble cities of Europe and the temples of China, a storm was gathering, one that would reshape the world. The Mongol tribes, once fragmented and feuding, had lived for centuries in relative obscurity. They were horsemen, nomads, herders of sheep, and riders of endless horizons. Their lives were harsh, dictated by nature and survival. Yet within this chaos, a vision was forming, one of unification, discipline, and unstoppable momentum. It would begin not with an empire, but with a boy named Temujin. Born around 1162 into a world of betrayal and brutal tribal warfare, Temujin's early life was marked by suffering. His father was poisoned by rivals, his family abandoned by their own clan, left to starve in the cold Mongolian wilderness. Temujin learned young that survival required not just strength, but cunning, loyalty, and vengeance. These weren't just personal lessons, they were foundational values that would become embedded in the future Mongol Empire. The world would not remember the boy who struggled in the snow, but it would never forget the name he would one day take: Genghis Khan. As Temujin grew, so did his legend. He didn't rise through nobility or inheritance, he earned every ounce of power through blood, brilliance, and an uncanny understanding of loyalty. He formed alliances not just through marriage or conquest, but through an unbreakable code: reward those who are loyal, destroy those who betray. He elevated warriors by merit, not by birth, an idea unheard of in the rigid tribal systems of the time. Slowly, he gathered a loyal force of outcasts, survivors, and hardened riders who saw in him not just a leader, but destiny made flesh. By the early 1200s, Temujin had done the impossible. He unified the Mongol tribes under one banner. The man who had once starved in the snow now bore the title Genghis Khan, universal ruler. But unity was never the end goal. For Genghis, it was merely the starting line. He believed the world was ruled by the strong, and that heaven had given him the divine right to conquer. The steppes had forged a predator, and now that predator turned its gaze outward toward the richest kingdoms the world had ever known. The first to feel the wrath of the new Mongol war machine were the kingdoms of northern China. The Western Shah and the powerful Jin dynasty underestimated Genghis Khan, seeing him as a barbarian nuisance at best. But the Mongols weren't just raiders, they were a new breed of conquerors. With unmatched discipline, nobility, and intelligence gathering, they besieged walled cities using Chinese engineers captured in earlier raids. Cities that had stood for centuries crumbled under siege, fire, and fear. The message was clear: submit or vanish. Genghis Khan introduced psychological warfare on a scale the world had never seen. Entire towns were massacred not out of cruelty, but strategy to terrify the next city into surrender. Survivors were sometimes left alive intentionally, just to spread stories of what they had seen: rivers of blood, pyramids of skulls, cities silenced forever. Resistance became synonymous with extinction. In just a few years, the Mongols had carved a path of terror through northern China, claiming territory larger than most European empires ever would. By 1219, Genghis Khan turned westward toward the Khwarezmian Empire, an Islamic superpower stretching across Persia and Central Asia. Initially, he came with peace, a caravan of diplomats and merchants offering trade. But the Shah, arrogant and suspicious, executed the envoys and seized their goods. It was a fatal mistake. To Genghis Khan, this was more than an insult, it was a declaration of war. And the response would be catastrophic. The Mongol retaliation was swift and apocalyptic. Cities like Bukhara and Samarkand, once jewels of Islamic civilization, were reduced to smoldering ruins. The Mongols unleashed a storm of siege weapons, deception, and calculated brutality. They didn't just defeat the Khwarezmians, they erased them. Entire populations vanished, libraries burned, canals destroyed. The Shah fled into the mountains, hounded to the very end. With this campaign, Genghis Khan proved that geography, wealth, and tradition were no match for a disciplined vision of domination. The known world began to tremble. The genius of Genghis Khan wasn't just in battle, it was in the way he shaped perception. The Mongols didn't rely solely on brute force. They used fear as a tool of mass control. Before entering a region, spies and scouts were sent to spread exaggerated tales of previous massacres. Whispers of horror would precede the army by weeks, sometimes prompting cities to surrender without a fight. To the Mongols, this was efficiency. To their enemies, it was a ghostly doom they couldn't touch or understand. but the fear was always grounded in truth. Mongol reprisals were absolute. If a city resisted and fell, it was not merely defeated, it was erased. Survivors were often used to build literal pyramids of skulls outside the gates, messages carved in bone for the next town to see. In their campaigns, Genghis Khan blurred the lines between myth and reality so thoroughly that entire civilizations collapsed under the weight of expectation. He didn't just win battles, he won minds before the war even began. At the core of the Mongol Empire's success was its unparalleled military organization. Every warrior was a master horseman and archer, trained from childhood to ride and shoot with terrifying precision. But beyond individual skill, it was the structure that made them unstoppable. A decimal system grouped soldiers into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Discipline was absolute. Cowardice meant execution. Loyalty meant promotion, regardless of birth. It was meritocracy forged in warfare, efficient, adaptive, and ruthless. The Mongols moved faster than any army before them, sometimes covering over 100 miles in a day. Their supply chains were mobile, using remounts and dried meat to sustain long campaigns. They could fake retreats, split armies to attack from multiple directions, and communicate across vast distances with smoke, fire, and relay riders. Siege weapons and engineers were integrated into the core, borrowed from conquered cultures. In every sense, they were a fusion of steppe mobility and imperial strategy. Their enemies weren't just defeated, they were outclassed. What set Genghis Khan apart from mere conquerors was his vision for an empire that could outlive him. He established a legal code known as the Yasa, a strict, unwritten set of laws that governed every aspect of Mongol life. It punished theft, treason, and dishonesty with brutal efficiency, but also protected religious freedom, enforced fair distribution of spoils, and demanded loyalty above all else. In a world of fractured kingdoms and arbitrary rule, the Yasa gave structure to chaos. Even the lowest herder knew the law and feared it. This code wasn't about morality. It was about control. The Yasa allowed Genghis to unify a diverse and sprawling empire, balancing tribal custom with central command. Religious leaders were spared in conquest, scholars protected, and artisans relocated rather than slaughtered. It was a system designed to keep the engine of empire running long after the battlefield cooled. While Europe wallowed in feudal fragmentation, the Mongols, under the shadow of the Yasa, moved as one fist. The empire was no longer just a military force. It was becoming a civilization. In 1227, after conquering lands stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, Genghis Khan died under mysterious circumstances. Some say he fell from his horse. Others whisper of assassins or divine punishment. What matters more than how he died was what he left behind. Not a crumbling kingdom dependent on his will, but a system of power so well structured it could function without him. His body was buried in secret, the location unknown to this day, an emperor fading into legend, as silent as the steppe he came from. But his death did not signal the end. It was only the end of the beginning. Before he died, Genghis divided the empire among his sons and grandsons, each given vast territories but expected to act under a common vision. His descendants would carry his legacy further than he ever dreamed. Under their rule, the Mongol Empire didn't shrink. It exploded. The horsemen of the steppes were now poised to descend upon Europe, the Middle East, and the heart of Asia with a fury the world had not yet seen. The storm had only shifted direction. In the 1230s, the Mongol war machine turned its gaze toward Europe. Led by Baitu Khan, grandson of Genghis, and the brilliant general Sabbatai, they launched a campaign that would shock the Western world. Russia fell first. Cities like Kiev were razed, and their populations annihilated. Then came Poland and Hungary. At the Battle of Mohi, Mongols used feigned retreats and precision strikes to crush European knights who believed brute strength could match strategy. The West had never encountered an enemy like this, invisible, mobile, and remorseless. Panic spread across Christendom. As rumors of entire kingdoms burning reached Western courts, the Pope called for prayers and unity. But the Mongols were not defeated by armies, they simply turned back after the death of Gedai Khan, Genghis's successor. It wasn't steel that saved Europe, it was timing. Had the Mongols continued west, history might have taken a different shape entirely. But even without conquest, the fear they inspired reshaped military thinking for generations. The horsemen from the east had scarred the European mind forever. Despite the carnage, the Mongol Empire ushered in an era of unprecedented connectivity. Known as the Pax Mongolica, this fragile peace spanned from the Yellow Sea to the Danube River. For the first time in history, a single political system controlled the Silk Road. Caravans traveled with official Mongol seals, protected by armed patrols. Merchants, monks, and diplomats moved freely through lands once divided by hostility. The world grew smaller under Mongol rule, and ideas began to move as quickly as goods. But make no mistake, this peace was built on a foundation of terror. Order was enforced through brutal discipline. Crime along the trade routes was punished with swift execution. Corruption was stamped out with the same cruelty reserved for battlefield traitors. It worked. For a brief moment in history, a merchant could travel from Venice to Beijing under one empire, one passport, and one law. The Mongol Empire had become not only the largest contiguous empire ever, but one of the most efficiently governed through sheer force of will. Great empires rarely fall from without, they rot from within. After the death of Genghis Khan's grandsons, unity began to unravel. The vast Mongol Empire splintered into rival khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Shangatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia. While still powerful, they no longer operated as a single force. Alliances fractured, rivalries intensified, and civil wars broke out between Mongol factions that once rode together as brothers in arms. Each Khanate faced different pressures. In China, the Mongol rulers alienated the native population and were eventually overthrown by the Ming. In Persia, the Ilkhanate collapsed under financial strain and internal chaos. The Golden Horde declined under the weight of rebellion and foreign threats. Without the singular vision of Genghis or the early discipline that built the empire, the Mongol world began to collapse into itself. What had once thundered across continents now fractured into isolated kingdoms clinging to fading glory. By the late 14th century, the Mongol Empire, once the greatest land power in human history, had crumbled into memory. But its impact never vanished. Genghis Khan redrew the map of the world, toppling dynasties, wiping cities from existence, and shattering the illusion that civilization was immune to annihilation. His descendants spread not only blood and fear, but also trade, ideas, and technologies that bridged East and West. The modern world, from gunpowder empires to global commerce, bears the fingerprints of Mongol expansion. Yet their legacy is complicated. To some, they were brutal savages, destroyers of culture, slayers of innocence. To others, they were master tacticians, visionaries of law, and creators of a new order from chaos. But whether feared or admired, one truth remains: no force before or since moved with such deadly precision and global consequence. The Mongol Empire was not built to last forever, but it burned so brightly, so violently, that the world still feels its heat. In the dust of empires, the echo of hooves never truly fades.